February 19th meeting of the Lake Forest City Council Finance Committee. Could we take the roll, please?
Certainly. Acting Mayor Schoenheider.
Here.
Chairman Pandaleon.
Here.
Alderman Novit.
Here.
Alderman Waldeck. Here. Alderman Moore.
Here.
Alderman Tack.
Here.
Alderman Reisenberg.
Here.
Alderman Palmer.
Here.
And Alderman Adelman.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Elizabeth. The next item on our agenda is consideration of the minutes from the Finance Committee meeting held on January 22nd, 2013. Are there any comments, additions, modifications, corrections?
Motion to approve.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. Third item on our agenda is core and elective service analysis for the fiscal year 2014 budget discussions. That's going to be presented to us by Elizabeth Holub, the City Director of Finance.
Thank you, Chairman Pandaleon. This is an updated core and elective service analysis for the FY14 budget document. The core and elective service analysis was developed a few years ago as part of the budget preparation process to more clearly articulate the different services that are provided by the various departments of the city and to designate those as core and elective, core being mandatory services and elective being those chosen by the city to be provided to its community. So we've provided in the packet the updates in a red line format so that you can clearly see the changes from last year. Most of those are just updates based on changes in duties, a transfer of real estate transfer tax administration from the Office of City Manager office to finance, and transfer of cemetery services from the Public Works Department to Parks and Recreation. But there are other minor changes submitted and proposed by each of the departments.
Does anybody have any questions or observations about the review and updated elective and core services exhibit?
The only comment I'd make is, yeah, and I did have opportunity to go over the list on Public Works with Mike Thomas, and at this point, I don't think you could take many more of the items from core down to elective without disrupting services provided to the city that are basic to the citizens. So we're stripping it pretty far at this point. It would be basically my comment. I don't know how much more you could remove from it.
But being elective doesn't mean they don't get done. It's just when things get tight, you look to the elective things and not the core things, right?
But these wouldn't be elective. This would be maintenance of sewer, water. This would be base public function as far as public works. So we're
What's
cutting
left?
pretty
What's
far.
left? Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I would agree. I noticed the same thing. Okay. Well, the purpose of the discussion was to consider this. I don't think we have to take any formal action. Am I correct in that?
Correct.
Okay.
If the committee concurs with the changes as recommended by the departments, we'll just incorporate the final document within the fiscal year budget document for 14.
Thank you. The next item is something we do have to take action on. It's the recommended water rates for fiscal year 14. This is a discussion item and recommendation that we approve. So, Elizabeth, we'll turn it back to you.
Certainly. As a follow-up to the discussion in January at the Finance Committee meeting, staff is bringing forward for the committee's consideration a recommended increase in the water rate effective May 1st, 2013 of 3%. This is consistent with the presentation that was given at the November capital budget discussion, and we've provided some additional material within the packet as additional information for the committee in their consideration. The first is page 24 of the packet, which provides an impact analysis of the rate adjustment on two different types of customers in Lake Forest. The first, example A, being a single resident customer, and example B being a family that uses irrigation during the summer. So you could see kind of the various magnitudes of the proposed rate adjustment. You can see that the rate adjustment would be $4.99 to $5.14 per 1,000 gallons. And for the single resident, the annual increase to the customer would be $6.14 projected. And the annual increase to the family example would be $31.82. So you can see what that magnitude would be of the proposed rate adjustment. The second, page 25 of the packet, is an updated water fee survey. This is similar in format as to that has been provided in prior years. We have added some additional communities to this, so you've got a better summary of the various rates that are being charged in these areas. And in addition, I would just note that we've also added to this a designation of M after the name of the communities that impose fixed or flat rates in addition to the usage or consumption charges similar to the city of Lake Forest. So you can see that those communities, similar to Lake Forest, do assess a flat rate in addition to the consumption charge.
Any observations or comments from the Finance Committee members?
Isn't Highland Park's artificially low because of the amount of water they sell? Did you hear that before?
Yeah, in Highland Park, they have actually more than 50% of their water production is sold outside the community, so they are able to leverage that increased capacity and lower their rates to all their customers.
Yeah, they sell the Bannockburn.
See the rate?
Yeah. We should look into that. Actually, no, never mind, Mike, I didn't say that. I could feel the darts coming. Okay, other comments or observations? Okay, well, I would entertain a motion that the Finance Committee approve the water rates.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, so this will go to the City Council for formal approval.
Can I make a post-vote comment? Sure. On the motion, can we just put, instead of 3% adjustment, increase adjustment? Because it isn't, you stated it clearly, but it isn't written.
Okay,
to
sure.
Show up increase.
Thank you. Next item is one of my favorite subjects, because every year that it comes up, I have to have it explained to me all over again. The private activity bond volume cap, which Elizabeth will explain to us again this year.
It is never easy, but the state of Illinois has allocated a certain cap for private activity bond activity and has developed guidelines on how the state then sub-allocates their allocation from the federal government. And there's a certain formula set out. As a home rule community in Illinois, Lake Forest receives a specific allocation of $95 per the estimated population, so it's a per capita allocation.
And if you could excuse me for a moment, could you just give us an example of what private activity might be?
Sure. What we did was included a listing from the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, but these would include private developers who come in and they may do a manufacturing facility or a housing project and want to use the private activity bond volume cap to acquire a lower interest rate. So they can, up to the cap that they have obtained, receive a rate that's usually 65 to 85% of market rates. Private activity bond activity has been pretty much nil in the last few years because of decreasing development activity, but also because of lower interest rates out in the market. So they haven't really needed to use the private activity bond volume cap because they're able to obtain low interest rates anyway. Typically, they have to pay for this cap, and so the margin isn't there for them to pay for the volume cap because they can't see that much in lower interest rate in their financing.
So does this come to us in the form of a federal guarantee or something?
It's not a federal guarantee. It's simply an allocation that's provided by the Office of Management and Budget at the governor's office, and they just keep track of the volume cap, who's allocated it, what bonds have been issued, and then they have to report back to the federal government.
But it would be bonds issued by the city?
They would be issued by the developer. And so
Okay.
they would issue private activity bonds utilizing the volume cap, either of the city or of a pool, obtaining a lower interest rate in that regard, and then reporting to the state that they've used that cap.
Okay.
There's no obligation to Lake Forest?
There
For
is
the-
no obligation. It works a little different than the other exempt. You can also have someone come as a 501c3 and ask the city to be a conduit issuer. That actually taps your $10 million of bank qualified limitation each year, and you are the actual issuer of those bonds. This works a little differently, and it's more arm's length without any requirement that the city issue those bonds on the developer's behalf.
Okay, I'm maybe taking this too far, but somewhere in there, there's a reason why the bonds go off at a lower interest rate because they're benefiting from this program.
Because the interest is exempt from taxes.
Okay, so it's like a little mini municipal bond.
Correct.
Do they have any nicknames for these things?
Not that I'm aware of.
Like dirt bonds or? No, I mean, there are these bonds out there that do these kinds of things where the bonds are sometimes issued by the community, sometimes by the private developer, but backed by the community and for infrastructure to
Like an
Get-
industrial revenue bond? Or similar to that?
similar, but more on like home building and that kind of thing, to put in water and sewers and things like that. That's different than a special service area, which is another kind of bond, so I'm learning as I go here, sorry. Okay.
So why does Buffalo Grove? Why does Buffalo Grove want our,
Well, what has happened is that because for most communities, the cap allocated to them through the formula is not significant enough to help fund a particular development within their community. Lake County Partners developed a clearinghouse whereby Lake County municipalities could pool their volume cap, and the Village of Buffalo Grove has voluntarily administered that clearinghouse program. It allows home rule communities to cede their individual cap to the Village of Buffalo Grove and pool that in one place. And then the Lake County Partners administers the program and serves as the entity that receives the developer proposals and works with the developers on a bond issuance on their behalf for a larger project.
Didn't we do this last year?
Yes, we do this every year.
Yes, you did. The city's participated in the clearinghouse program since 2007. And in early years, earlier than that, when the market was a little more competitive, communities could actually sell their cap to the highest bidder. I know in Highland Park, we received transfer fees as high as 2%, whereas the clearinghouse offers 0.5% for the cap once the bonds are issued to fund a particular development. But because of the lower activity and the lower interest in the last few years, the clearinghouse hasn't actually had a development since 2008. So in the last 4 years, there has been no development, but they are talking actively with a potential development at the current time.
And when you think about it, 65% of market rate is a lot less than a 2% fee for buying it, right?
Well, if the more interest rates are 6%, then that's not
Yeah.
the case, right? If they're
Oh.
4% or 3%,
You think they're going up?
someday.
Elizabeth, does our allocation go on our fiscal year or is it a calendar year?
It's a calendar year allocation, so
Okay.
the governor's office issues the guidelines in January, and then the cities have an option to take action by May 1st to either reserve or transfer their cap for that calendar year, or it is ceded back to the state, and the state creates their own pool.
Okay.
Is this a cumulative thing? So do we have 4 years' worth of these caps piled up, or is it a use it or lose it?
It's a 3-year. You can carry
it's
it
3
over
years,
to a
okay.
maximum of 3 years.
So 2008 is no longer on the table. 2009 is about to go off the table.
Right.
Okay. Any other questions? Until next year?
Well, the recommendation is to go ahead and transfer to Lake County Partners this year. We don't have any other interest from any other developers. That would require a resolution by the city council, so if the finance committee concurs, we would just bring that back to a city council agenda at a later date.
And we always do this sort of toward the end of the fiscal year when we know we're not going to need it. So,
Sounds good.
I guess at this point, I'd move to approve the resolution.
do I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries, thank you. The next item is other business. And these are just information only items. The first is the January 2013 flash report. I don't know if anybody has any questions or comments about that. Other than I would continue to note, A, that the state still owes us $350,000 plus dollars. But they're only 3 months behind now, and they were 4 months behind not too long ago. Secondly, just a point of interest, the number of real estate transfer tax transactions continues to run ahead of last year by a significant margin, and the amount of revenue we're getting from it continues to run behind last year's revenue by a significant margin. And I think that has to do with the trend over the last year in home values in the community, and also what types of properties are selling, which tend to be the less expensive homes in town. So just an interesting sort of factoid from the marketplace. Next item is the Information Technology Master Plan. There's a 5-year Information Technology Master Plan that's been developed and attached to our packet. It was presented to us, I believe, a couple of meetings ago, and I don't know if there are any comments or observations about that, but I'd entertain any such comments or observations. All right. Third item for discussion is fiscal year 2014 budget. Elizabeth, maybe you can, or Bob, maybe you can describe this one a little bit better.
Yeah, let me take this. Elizabeth and I have been, over the course of the last maybe 3 to 5 months, trying to look at the budget process retrospectively, if you will, because we know last couple of years it seems like we have tried to give you an awful lot of information at that second meeting, the March budget meeting, in a very short period of time. And so what we tried to do was look at some of those items that would normally be on that March budget meeting to see if we could pull them off and bring them either before a finance committee like tonight or a regular city council. And in some cases, they don't even have to be acted on at that March meeting. They could be discussed at an April, May, or June type meeting. And so what Elizabeth has prepared here is a list of those budget discussion items for the 2014 budget year, and to show the ones that we've already talked about up to this point in time, but then more importantly, identifying those topics that would normally be a component of that budget discussion, and show you how we're sort of breaking them out and spreading them out over a longer period of time, so that you don't feel as though it's a fire hose of information coming at you at that March 18th City Council meeting. So this was really an attempt to just make sure that you're aware of how some of these topics are going to be discussed, even if they're not discussed at the March 18th meeting. We, I believe, have every one of these covered under the other report that I gave you that shows you the various topics that are coming up through your committee meetings and your city council meetings over the course of the next couple of months. And if there's anything on here that you would like for us to either adjust, move forward, move backward, so forth, please let Elizabeth or I know. And hopefully this allows for a little more productive conversation about some of these subjects. And I think sometimes you've expressed to us that it's just too much to digest at that period of time, and we wish we had a little more time to go through these matters. But we'll be happy to answer any questions that you might have with respect to any of them. And I think we tried to identify which ones, particularly in the green, are scheduled to be discussed at that March 18th meeting, and we really are going to need some discussion on a couple of these items and actual actions there, and other ones, as you can see, we can push off to later in the year.
I guess the only comment I would have is that's great. I mean, the March madness or whatever. It was just way too much to deal with all at once. But having said that, if we spread it out throughout the course of the year, we run the risk of losing the context and, you know, trade-offs that are being made in various places. So I guess my only request would be that along the way here, we maybe begin each discussion with a recap of what we've decided in the prior discussions, so that we all can kind of get our heads around what we might have talked. You know, if we're in September talking about a matter and it's impacted by a decision we made in March,
That's a very good point.
it could be something that we lose track of or lose sight of, and we may end up, you know, we maybe end up not making the trade-offs we need to make, or not remembering the trade-offs we made. So,
That would be very helpful.
any other comments or
Well,
thoughts
one
about the
related
process?
question I have, I think we sent out an email about starting time for that March 18th meeting. I believe last year it was slightly after 5 o'clock, so for those of you who are taking the 5:10, you get, I think, get in at 5:10, 5:15. We could move it up, we could move it back, and that will help us decide which of these items can stay on that March 18th and which we're going to have to move to other meetings as well. Is 5 o'clock still a good time for everybody, or 5:15, I think is when the train gets in? Okay. All right, we'll go forward with that then.
Well, on your question of other comments, if we're going to discuss these things throughout the year relative to Alderman Pandaleon's comments, you know, would it make sense when we look at variances to look at rolling 12 months? Or is that a big, nasty can of worms? Because if we're going to look at things in the first month and try to look at variances, we're going to have 30 days of experience on a year-to-date basis. And some of your analysis is year-to-date, so.
Yeah, what we have tried to do in that summary, the first page we've added to the flash report this year, is provide you the 3-year average based on that point in time. So you'll be comparing the fiscal year 14 May results compared to the 3-year average May results. So you will have apples to apples and be able to assess that better
On a year-to-date basis.
on a year-to-date basis. Before, we were not including that, we weren't capturing that prior year information at that same point in time. And so we tried to add that column to give you a better perspective on where we were at that given point in time for the year.
That makes sense to me.
Is that helpful?
But that was,
Yeah.
I had the same concern, and we also didn't have very much information at all in the flash report about expenses. There were broad categories, and it was only kind of month by month. So we added, I don't know, maybe not everybody noticed this, because it's probably not the first thing you go looking for when you get home in the evening, but we modified the flash report fairly extensively to do more of that kind of, give you a view of how things are tracking over time. By the way, any other suggestions for how we can improve that report, are more than welcome. So if you find it useful, great. If you think it needs to be improved, please let me or Elizabeth know. And the one thing I would say is let's try to keep it short. You know, there's a temptation to keep adding stuff, and then it's not a flash report anymore. Then it becomes a real report. And you
I
won't use-
assume the
won't use it at all.
Westlake Forest TIF is coming off.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that'll simplify it.
Yeah. And the fourth item for discussion is sanitation study. The Public Works Department has initiated a sanitation study that will review the city's refuse, recycling, yard waste, and compost center operations. Mike, would you like to give us a little background on that?
Sure. As part of the discussions, approximately about a year ago or so, on the city council, we discussed the idea of studying and evaluating the sanitation operation a little more thoroughly. Not only the services we currently provide, but then potentially looking at services that we would like to provide, recognizing that our equipment and our guys are in town basically every day, that we looked at the possibility of possibly generating some revenue for the city and offering these services to some private institutions, schools, etc. So we're going to be looking at the sanitation section comparing it against 2 other municipalities on the North Shore that currently collect refuse in-house, as well as 2 that contract it out, and see where our numbers fall. And then in addition to that, look at proposing some ways of offering some additional services, again, because we've got the equipment to do so. All of this based around the idea of possibly looking at the idea of going to once-a-week collection. Our recycling numbers are up, refuse is going down, and the question will be thrown out there, should we look at that a little more thoroughly, and possibly via this community forum on June 20th to get community input as to whether or not something like that would be acceptable. I think a lot of people recognize that the refuse has gone down. On the other hand, it's somewhat of a challenging decision at times when you suggest they're going to hold the garbage inside the garage for a week. And that's basically what will happen. So pros and cons to it, and we want to discuss that with yourselves and the community, and put together some options and come back with a recommendation.
Thank you. Any questions or thoughts about that?
Michael, I didn't have a thought about that, but I just had one comment. We've talked about this before. Are you going to send out kind of do's and don'ts on where to put your recycling container and how to sit in? As I drive around the community, I see more and more that are some up on the yard, some at the end of the street, some in the neighbor's yard. They're all over the place. And I've got to think it's very inefficient for your guys to be able to get them and to move quickly.
Correct. Yeah, and that's part of the efficiency with the program, is that we're able to get through, and our tonnages are really increasing a lot. But you're correct. If the guy's got to get out and move the cart because it's not in reach of the automatic arm, then we're defeating the whole purpose. So yes, we can do that. And I think the best way to do it really is to consult the guys that do it. We all have our own opinions, but we'll talk to the drivers and see what issues they're running into and put together something that we can send out as reminders.
I think we missed an opportunity to maybe stencil something onto the containers when we first issued them, and for the ones we haven't issued, maybe we could do that.
People are forgetful. I think the dialogue letter is a great place to put a paragraph or 2 instructing residents how to face them properly.
There's also, you could always put a sticker on,
Yeah, you just slap a sticker on.
slap a
the
sticker
ones.
on there.
Sure.
Big bright orange sticker.
Facing an arrow with the street on it,
Yeah.
Just one side comment, saying that we have about a half hour till city council, so, and it won't be a comment about boulders, so don't worry.
No filibustering, Ken.
With the businesses in town, and I know I brought this up, and maybe it didn't register, a lot of the businesses for, say, a few takeout items for carryout, use plastic materials that are non-recyclable in our system. And it seems kind of counterproductive if we're creating plastics and our businesses are using things that are incompatible with our system. I'm wondering if there's some way we could, as they take out licenses, require them to use materials that are compatible with our recycling program.
Well, first of all, the businesses in town contract privately for their refuse collection. And
Well, I'm not talking about their refuge collection, but as I take it out,
Okay.
it goes in my refuge,
Sure.
not theirs. So
Sure. Highland Park did something very similar to that about a year ago, where they banned styrofoam, which is a number 6 plastic. City council could entertain the same. The one thing I think I would need to do on my side is check with the company that we take our material to, because they're very concerned that the materials that they receive are at least rinsed, and that if it comes with food material in it, it begins to mess up their sorting equipment. It gets into the machines and it just doesn't work. So, but we actually had talked to them recently about, for example, solo cups, some of the plastic cups, and for some reason there was some hesitation on their part to accept those. But we'll talk to them and see what materials would be acceptable, and maybe put together campaign to ask local businesses to use those materials.
Are these objectionable?
Yes.
There.
Well, we could start with ourselves.
maybe we don't want to penalize ourselves, but we could encourage some way. maybe
Except
give
city
some-
council.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and again, I think that the most important thing to remember with the recycling is that it is all based on the demand for the product, flat out. If there is demand for that material that somebody is gonna buy and reuse somehow, some way, then that's why the recycling exists. And for example, in that, the number 6, the plastic is very hard to reuse and manipulate. So they don't want us including that in the program.
We wash these out after every meeting and use them again.
Put your name on them.
No, we remember
Thought you
the
wanted
tooth
to
marks.
recycle. But yeah, I've noticed an unusual amount of businesses do use plastic number 6 for the items that you could carry out, and that's just, you want to comply with the recycling program and use it. I actually get excited to fill the bins, but you can't, and it's disappointing that, again, our products in the city
Yeah,
can't.
and there are materials that number 5 have the number 5 on them that many restaurants use, but you're right. Majority of them do use the number 6, so.
That's as much time as I could fill.
Okay. The next item on our, that concludes the general discussion items. The next item on our agenda is an opportunity for the public to address the Finance Committee, recognizing that there will be a city council meeting starting shortly, so if you have items to talk about. And then the other thing we might consider is, can we get a head start on some of the finance, or some of the city council items?
Sure. Before that, I just wanted to mention, because she's going to be leaving shortly, Elizabeth is going to be leaving us tonight, going to Matawa, delivering a message that was drafted over Mayor Schoenheider's signature, going back to the issue of sales tax. Lake Forest and Matawa have a boundary agreement, sales tax sharing agreement for the Oasis property on the tollway. It's been in place for probably approximately 15 years. And off and on over that period of time, we've had problems with the State of Illinois Department of Revenue giving accurate information about how much money has been received and where that money goes. I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago, the city of Lake Forest was being credited with mobile gas station receipts that should have been going into the sharing arrangement. So we had to issue them a check for, I think it was about $95,000. But since that period of time, and particularly when the Oasis was under construction and completely renovated, they haven't gotten it straight since then. And I think, at least based on all of our calculations, Matawa owes us approximately $300,000. So they have not objected to giving us the money. They're a little slow in arriving at a decision because I think they're also wondering, based on some fluctuations in their sales tax receipts, particularly from Costco, they're wondering if, you know, some of the other money is going here or there. So Elizabeth is going there this evening to ask for a check for $300,000. We have every reason to believe that they will give us a check for a certain amount, and hopefully it's very close to that amount. But we, the City of Lake Forest and the Village of Matawa, are trying to jointly work with Department of Revenue to give us the background information so that we can properly track, A, the businesses that are in and out of the tollway Oasis from time to time, and then B, what their receipts are. So hopefully she'll come back with a check with $300,000 that will also help. Those numbers don't reflect that liability either, so you'll see a bump in that once we do get that check. But I think more importantly is we'll be able to put in place, and I think it's going to require some legislative assistance, put in place some kind of mechanism that we can more properly track the receipts that are coming in from the businesses in the Oasis. So I just wanted to mention that to you and let you know that she won't be here for the regular council meeting because she's going to be there on some rather important matters.
Where's Tom Wersch when you need him, right?
Yeah.
Didn't he run the toll rate?
Yeah.
Since we were nice enough to send them Costco, maybe we can renegotiate
I was
the
gonna say,
split.
couldn't we get one of those agreements on the Costco?
Maybe they ought to give us 100% of the Oasis.
Yeah, well, and you know, it was one of those, Elizabeth and I have chatted about this now, it was one of those deals that at the time it seemed like a good thing because the Oasis and the tollway property was in unincorporated Lake County. And we said, well, let's go ahead and annex it, but there was also a question then of if it came into the city of Lake Forest, what would our obligations be to provide services versus Matawa, which doesn't have services and has some primarily other taxing districts that provide services. So at the time, it seemed like it was a very good idea of sharing the revenue and there was very little or no expense. I think right now we wish we were in charge of getting the original check and the data from Department of Revenue, but we have to live with the agreement that's in place.
Okay.
With 10 minutes left or 20 minutes left, should I do my little explanation of the meeting? Because it's really
Sure.
for the Alderman, right? Get that out of the
Actually, that'd be
way?
very good.
Shorten the meeting, is that okay with you,
Sure,
Chairman?
absolutely.
Kind of a practice.
It's, we just type these up. This is the, make sure I get enough here. Pass those down. We've just been working on the, having the first community engagement meeting. Kathy and, that's, because this one was related to community development. Kathy and Bob and I sat down and went over an agenda and kind of the thing that was guiding us was the purpose of these meetings is going to be to gather information to inform City Council so that when they do come up, we're better informed and aware of concerns and possibilities that the community has and why we're doing these things. So we're hoping, as the first one, to develop a format so that the information that comes back to City Council for all of our meetings is similar to each other's so that it's easier to interpret. That way, that kind of thing. Now, we're still working that out. I'll be working with the rough draft. We didn't make a lot of copies of this, but it's kind of, if you can just take a look, it's possibilities, concerns, and questions with a statement of purpose at the top, kind of a, couple of categories, with only enough room for 10 in each so that we don't get into lengthy things, and in more of a bullet point form. That's basically it. I prepared a kind of an opening statement, and then we went through the format and then get as much done ahead of time as possible. But the rest of it's just, you can just read it, and if you have any questions or comments, because we'll all be kind of formulating this as we go. But this is what we think is our first best guess. Is that fair enough?
Absolutely. I think two things in front of you should be a calendar of what we think are the sessions for 2013. There's a couple we're still missing, so for a few of you, please feel free to call me at your leisure about selected topics so we can get you on the calendar for 13. We've looked at this as more or less a template for these other future meetings and just dropping in the topics, but the format of the meeting would be the same, except unless we hear some feedback from the residents tomorrow night that there's a different way that we might be able to structure it to be even more productive. So I think David was brave enough to be our guinea pig and to
It was
go out-
assigned to me.
That's right. And test this out. We're feeling very good about it. We'll let you know, depending on whether we get 5 people or 105 people who come to the meeting. And then Alderman Moore is going to be reporting back to you on the T-form that he mentioned at the next meeting about what we heard from the meeting, and then more importantly, where we may want to take the topic or not, depending on the reaction we get from the people in attendance. So any other thoughts and ideas that anybody have? I know the staff is very open to any suggestions and any ways we've tried to get the information out to the public to encourage people to attend. I think some of it's going to be dictated by weather and a few other things, but hopefully people start to look at these monthly meetings and start to attend with some regularity.
7 p.m.?
7 p.m. to 8:30.
Are these meetings going to be telecast or taped?
They are not. We're doing them in Gorton. At the first one tomorrow night, unfortunately, is going to be in the grotto at Gorton, but afterwards, we have Gorton Community Room booked for that third Thursday of the month. And so they're not televised. And I have to say, part of the reason we decided not to televise them is that we want people to be as very open and frank and candid as possible. And sometimes when you're televising, they have a tendency to shut down or not be as candid as they otherwise would be. Eventually, I think any of these topics that we're talking about or any that you have identified would ultimately go to a public hearing, and therefore they would be televised at that point in time. But at this first step, it's really more to just sort of let people let their hair down and tell us what they really think about the subject and what their concerns and what their issues are.
How about a question on a related topic? Where do we stand on the issue of ward meetings and dates, times, chosen dates?
I know she's working on it. I think the second ward might be the only ward that's locked in at this point in time. I think we're still, and if you think you've locked in your dates, please let me or Shelley know, Shelley Walker in my office know, because we had sent out some dates and some calendars, and I know a couple of you were going to get together with your counterparts and lock in a date, so I think we're still working on some of those.
I would just encourage everybody on the council, if you haven't already done so, to put your heads together and get a date, because the ward meetings are really an opportunity for us to get out and talk to the residents and get input from them, and it's really an important thing. And I think the residents appreciate it, and I think it's good for us. So if you haven't already done that, coordinate with Susan, and let's get them on the calendar.
We turned in a calendar, right, with,
You did. I think yours is locked in. And maybe some of the others are, I just don't know. I personally collected yours, so I know that yours is in. I can't tell you what that date is off the top of my head, but we'll send out an email tomorrow
so
reminding
do George and I
everybody.
have a date, or?
Yep.
You
Oh,
do have a
okay.
date.
We do.
Where
are we going?
Second word.
I know it.
I think you're going to Cherokee School, but I'll verify that.
It actually would be good to, last
One
year
of
we had it
them,
at
yeah.
the Croya room, and I think the location threw some people, or a lot of people that showed up late. So, any other items that we could get ahead of here that, I didn't see any myself.
Well, the only other one might be right at the very end of your agenda, which is a discussion on the liquor license for gas stations. Mayor Schoenheider and I chatted about this because we have received a request, and I think most of the council members know that we currently, our history has been that we do not have available liquor licenses. That we actually have to come before you, we have to change our ordinance to change the number of available licenses within that category. If you approve that ordinance change, then the liquor commissioner, who is the mayor, is then able to issue that license to the petitioner. And before we brought this ordinance before you, and actually asked the attorney to draft something, because we don't have anything in our code right now that even allows gas stations to be able to sell liquor in Lake Forest, that we thought we would have this conversation, because in my conversations with a few of you, there's no consensus. You know, some of you think it's a great idea, some of you don't think it's a good idea, and so we put it on the agenda this evening to allow you to talk amongst yourself and say, is this really a path we want to go down? If so, then we'll direct the city attorney to make the necessary modifications to the city code to permit this. I will add as a side note that we've been meeting with the attorneys to talk about our code, because we really think that, quite frankly, there's a lot of areas that need to be cleaned up in our code. You might remember last October when the Market House wanted to do their Oktoberfest. It really didn't fit anywhere into our code. So we're going to be coming back to you probably in March with some comprehensive changes to the code. So we could either put this in or not, depending on what the pleasure of the council is.
And Bob, as a follow-up to that, you know, we've discussed a little bit, and I think I asked Bob to send an email out to everyone to get input. You know, in the past, we've had inquiries from kind of non-traditional users that wanted to obtain liquor licenses. In the recent past, places like the drugstores have gotten them. Some of the reluctance for allowing liquor sales, generally talking about beer and wine now, in gas stations in the past have been the perception of proximity to schools, obviously the whole issue of you know, purchasing alcoholic beverages and getting in the car to go with it. Bob and I did with Kathy, met with Chief Held recently and got some input from him on that, but we wanted to also just throw it open to the council for any thoughts and discussions about how they felt about it. I think, you know, with a couple of the drugstores that are really in close proximity to schools, with them having liquor licenses now, the thought is perhaps should we entertain the idea of allowing gas stations to have that as well?
One other question I have, or just a thought that I have, how late is the gas station in question open?
That's a good question.
Because if it's open till midnight and other places selling liquor are closing at 9 or 10 p.m.,
Good evening. Yeah, the Shell in the corner here is usually open till 11. Sometimes they stretch that to 12. It used to be open 24 hours years ago, but they've since not stopped doing that.
What time does Walgreens close and CVS?
Walgreens usually close by 9 o'clock, the latest.
CVS at maybe later than 9, I think?
It might be 9 or 10, yes.
Okay.
Not exactly sure,
And is
CVS.
the Shell station, is that typically one person on duty at night? Because at Walgreens, you're gonna have a couple people there, and at CVS, you're probably gonna have a couple people there. Is
Yes.
it-
The Shell is usually one person, usually mostly during the day. There might be somebody in the back, but as far as like at the cash register, one, maybe two in the morning if they're busy, but usually every time I've gone in there, it's one person. So depending on where they were to have alcohol, it could be a problem that way.
Officer Hill, from your perspective, what are the pros and cons?
I don't know about any pros from my standpoint. Cons are, yeah, going back to having one attendant there. They only have the one area that's refrigerated on that far south wall. So assuming that's where they're going to keep their beer, it's out of the view of the attendant. You know, we know that especially on Fridays when Deerpath gets out at half a day, all the kids head that way towards town. They all stop in the Shell to get their candy or whatever they're getting there. So now there's alcohol there. Is there a chance for them to potentially shoplift more of the alcohol? Yes, there's a chance. Will it happen? Obviously, I can't say for sure. But the fact that they're only going to have one and perhaps two attendants there, I think the propensity for that could be more so than maybe some other places.
What do other communities around us do?
I couldn't see. I had not researched it. I couldn't tell you. I mean, obviously, Knollwood, the gas station's up there. It's, you know, obviously unincorporated, so a little different. But the Mobile up there, the Citgo up there, they all sell alcohol inside. Usually have one, maybe two attendants working there also. Similar problem. I think if our high school kids wanted to go there and drive, they could. But we're talking about the St. Mary's kids and the kids from Deerpath that are usually walking by there on their half days. They all stop in there at some point in time when they have those short days. So. Could that be a problem? Yes, it could be a problem, yes.
You know, as we talked about though as well, and I would agree with the chief, it's not a pro, but the idea of kind of in the interest of fairness, I mean, we have allowed Walgreens to have it, we have allowed CVS to have it. And so the case that's being made now is it's a very similar kind of location, very similar kind of a situation. And the folks that have approached us about this particular item are struggling with the idea that, that seems a bit unfair.
Yeah, I'm pretty much a free marketer, and I believe in fairness, but I think this is a bad idea.
I think there is the issue of the message, yeah. Drink and drive, if you get at the gas station, you're getting back in your car, unless you're walking there. But you could walk to Walgreens if that were the case.
It's a loosey-goosey operation. It's not like a Walgreens, it's not like a CVS that's manned with 5 to 7 individuals. It just doesn't feel good to me.
Interestingly, both CVS and Walgreens have security at the doors. It's electronic, but it's there. I don't believe there's any such security at the door of either of the two gas stations in town.
No, there's nothing like that.
Are there any cameras in there?
There are cameras, usually most of them are on the outside, and sometimes they're recording, sometimes they're not, so it's hit or miss. Inside, I'm not sure what their camera situation is. They only utilize their outdoor ones.
Yeah, I mean, in a broader level, and take it back to the 50s or 60s when alcohol was tightly restricted. We've loosened up on that dramatically as a community. And I think we're kind of fooling ourselves to a certain degree if we're saying we're shielding our children when the alcohol's everywhere, at the restaurants, at the Jewel, it's all over town. The issue that I get a little scared of at this point is, again, when I was growing up, there were gas stations everywhere. We're down to 2 gas stations in Lake Forest right now. One's got the car wash, so they've got an ability to maybe make some money on something else. I'm looking at this as more of a question of the economic viability of the gas station to a degree. If it's not profitable, we're going to be down to 1 gas station pretty soon. And for those, heaven forbid, with a diesel vehicle, I can't even get my gas in Lake Forest anymore. I have to go to Highwood or Lake Bluff. It's going to be a lot more difficult for people to have that destination to fill up their cars. And I mean, as you go to fill up your car, you go to other businesses in the area. So it's one more reason to go to Costco one more reason to make the trip somewhere else if these gas stations aren't located there. So just broadening the thought a little bit.
Well, something that, possibly, and this kind of just came to me now, is as opposed to them having their beer and stuff out in public, maybe needs behind the counter, similar to cigarettes.
Yeah.
So that's what they have to have a cooler installed back there if they want to have it cold.
Yeah.
And now they have to get it from the attendant who has to then check IDs, as opposed to somebody else open the cooler, take a bottle out of a six-pack and walk out with it. So maybe that could be a requirement. It would kind of go both ways. They probably couldn't have as much on stock or up for sale at one time, but they'd have to be restocking. So
Yeah.
that's something maybe they could do. So
Yeah, just a balance.
Pretty hard to imagine that the gas station selling beer and wine is going to save them from economic demise. I mean, if they're not making it as a gas station, they're not going to make it by selling the volume of alcohol they're going to sell here in Lake Forest unless they're doing something unusual. So I'm not sure there's a great economic argument for this.
I think that's the
Surprisingly, most
purpose
of
of
the
the request, though, is to
Yeah.
be more profitable, right? I mean, they think so, I guess.
I'd love to see the numbers on that. I just find that hard to believe.
And keep in mind, you walk into Sunset Foods, they've got a whole room full of alcoholic beverages, a wide variety of selection. The space at the Shell station is so small and limited, they're not going to have much of a variety. Even the Walgreens has a
Very
more
limited, yeah.
potential to offer variety in all the grocery stores. I could go either way on this. I agree with Randy that I don't think the economic viability of that gas station is going to hinge on having a stack of cold beer. They're just going to be too limited. And the soda pop, they make just as much money on a soda pop as they do.
I agree, but the discussion of what they should or shouldn't do for business, I agree with you. I can't imagine it making much of a difference. But I feel like it's none of my business to have that discussion, because if they want to ask for it, because if they think it's going to help them, that seems kind of their right to request based on their belief that it would help them, even though I agree with you.
Well, let me ask this question. Then, so we do the gas station and allow them to sell packaged liquor. How about the bars in town? Can they now sell packaged liquor? Why not? Because that actually is their core business. So why shouldn't they be allowed to sell packaged liquors?
Under
if we're
current
just-
license, some do.
Okay.
You could go to Walgreens, Lantern, and ask for a six-pack on the way home. You can do that right now under their license. So,
Chief, is there any evidence, like empirical evidence, that gas stations selling liquor lead to more, or do more accidents happen from people leaving bars or leaving gas stations with carryout? Or, well, that's a loaded question, but I was thinking as I was asking it, but is there a, because I know it's for cars, but you also drive to Jewel or Sunset and get back in your car, and
Right.
and you drive to, we don't walk to Walgreens, we drive to CVS, and but is there any evidence? Is it just more outlets lead to more drinking? Is that evident? Is that evidenced anywhere? Is there, should we be slowing? I'm not a prohibition person, but
yeah, I couldn't speak statistically. I really don't know. The assumption, just common sense, be at a bar, you're drinking at the bar, so you're consuming.
I didn't mean to
on-premise.
ask that question. That was
Right. As far as if you're going there to pick up, the assumption is you're picking up to take elsewhere. That doesn't mean somebody's not going to open a beer in their car, or open a bottle in their car. We don't typically run into that anyway. Usually, when it comes to DUIs, so to speak, they're coming from a restaurant or a bar. It's not like they're coming from the Jewel or something like that. It's usually coming from a place where they're drinking it on that premise.
What about kids getting booze?
I think this does make it more easy, more accessible to them. Again, going back to if it's in the cooler case on the south side, they have one attendant, and all of a sudden you get 50 kids in there from Deerpath. That attendant's, all he's doing is ringing up kids, and who knows what's going on in the back of that store. We know they have a shoplifting problem there. They very rarely call us because their kids are taking packs of gum. How do you know they took it? Well, next thing you know, you have bottles of wine or beer or something like that missing. So I think it does open that door to make it more possible. I can't say it will happen for sure, which is why if they were to have it behind the counter similar to cigarettes, where they'd have to get it for somebody, I think that would alleviate that problem somewhat.
Mr. Mayor, can I make a suggestion? Only because of time, and also, my staff just informed me that the proprietor from the Shell station is actually outside, so you're gonna have this conversation again.
We're gonna have the conversation
Later
again,
on.
okay.
But if you want, I'll ask Chief Held to speak with him over the course of the next half hour to hour to explain to him some of the concerns that were raised here this evening, so he can be prepared to answer some of the questions that you've brought forward here in the last 10, 15 minutes.
That'd be great. Thank you.
All right, well, we've used our allotted time, so, I would then entertain a motion to adjourn the Finance Committee meeting.
So moved.
Aye.
All in
Aye.
favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Meeting's adjourned.